As many of us know, and I wanted to kind of launch into this a little bit to bring a touch of reality to us by utilizing some of what has happened this last week in regards to this event over at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, where 28 people have lost their lives. It is a very sad situation. I mean, when you think about it and you are, trying to wrap your mind around the event itself, and all of the circumstances that go along with that. And I want to ask perhaps for some commentary here, so get ready, kind of get thinking here a little bit. I mean, because I think all of us have our ideas as to maybe perhaps why things appear to be ramping up in this kind of area. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened, going back from Columbine, and I haven't done a tally on how many of these mass shootings have occurred, but we just had one here previous to this one, and then last night I understand that some guy shot in cold blood some woman in a Las Vegas casino and then killed himself again. I mean, these are like suicide mass murders, and they are mass murderers. I mean, they're not, as they would say, suicide what do they call them? Suicide terrorists. I always call them murder terrorists because that's the way they're suicide murderers, because that's what it is. It's just plain, flat-out, cold-blood murder when people do these kinds of things. And it does, of course, I mean, it is horrific when you think about the event and how it has occurred. There is no way of describing other than the fact of being just totally mortified as a parent to realize your 5-year-old or your 6-year-old who you just got ready for school, send him off or her off to school knowing now you'll never see them again. I mean, it's like surreal. It's just got to be so stunningly shocking that it doesn't even seem real of such a chaos and mayhem can occur on this level with this kind of set of circumstances and it being so mindless. And I'm just kind of wondering from your observations and your points of view, if any of you have some comments, observations yourself that you would like to share in respect to some of this. I mean, what are you thinking? How does this impact you? What does it look like to you is going on in this country? Have any ideas, George?
First thing I thought about was satanic influence.
Satanic influence.
That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah. Demonic. Demons.
Demonic, yeah.
It seems people are just not really able to constrain themselves anymore. I mean, we've always had mentally disturbed people among us. We always have had, whether they be autistic, whether they have personality disorders, whether they're schizophrenic, they call it now bipolar. But regardless, I mean, you go back into even the early 20th century, the late 18th century, when shock treatment, in the psych wards, as they would call them, was used back in those days in these, very dark, what looked like very haunting facilities of mental illness down here in downtown Cleveland. I forget what it was called now, over there by Metro Hospital, but it just looked like it, but the place was haunted. It was a psychiatric institute. I forget the name of it now, but at any rate, it was right adjacent to Metro Hospital there on the 14th Street curve on the freeway. But at any rate, that's another point. But it's just, it's different though today. It really is different today. Any other comments? Dave?
Something that I heard on the Dennis Prager show, I'm not exactly sure if I'm using the right words, but cut flower morality.
Cut flower.
We're all flowers, we're connected to God in that sense, but when we do turn ourselves away from the Creator and we're cut off, the values continue. The flower continues to grow, to be alive even though it's cut off. And eventually it wilts faster than the one that is still connected to the Word. So a lot of people are continuing with morals, but not knowing what the source of those morals are. And not knowing that the truest problem that we have here is that we're all cut off from God.
That is
when we have turned from His Word.
That's an interesting analogy there. The cut flower approach or the cut flower event, and I can kind of stirred my mind up in this sense too, because that analogy, taking it another step forward, being in water treatment. It requires also, for the preservation of the life of the flower, for the enhancement of color, for the preservation of life, to properly use the right water. If you use dirty water, that stem loads up, the flower doesn't get the nutrients that it would normally, and the flower dies prematurely, and the colors never maximize. You put it in purer water, meaning like the Word of God, so to speak, you have a flower that would then bloom in better color and, of course, last longer and be healthier all around. And certainly that analogy does certainly apply, because we are all connected in one way or another to God. And that is bringing me to some of the points that I want to talk about a little bit. But any other observations? Any statement, Carly? Stand up. Voice carries better.
I'm also thinking about just how society is in general now. It's like when I was a child growing up, we didn't have these violent games where they're shooting, killing, shooting, killing, shooting, killing. You know, it's like these kids start playing this at 7
And maybe earlier.
or earlier.
Yeah.
And they're sitting in front of their television or their computers and they're playing these shoot 'em up games. Well, do they think it's any big deal to walk into a school and do that to real people? Probably not.
Interesting point. Well, I'm going to be speaking to the choir here today. Any other comments? Any other observations? Dave?
I don't know if I'm off base or not, but I always think about all these psychedelic drugs that these kids are on when they, you know, there's so many kids now that they go to the doctor and the doctor wants to put them on these different types
Oh, like
of
a
drugs.
Ritalin and all that?
And, you know, they lose their sense of reality sometimes, I
Mhm.
think.
Mhm.
And I don't know.
More medication. That's an interesting
Just
point.
I know that the kids at Columbine were on some of these drugs.
Yeah.
That this kid had some issues. I don't know what kind of drugs he was on.
Ecstasy, I think that was one years ago, was pretty popular in the 80s.
Well, no, I'm talking about prescribed.
Prescribed drugs, yeah,
prescriptions
yeah.
from doctors.
Right, because children, young people are being put on those younger and younger because they're not able to be controlled by the parents, so to speak. And consequently, you're right, you do have these kids being strung out on some of this stuff much sooner than what
We don't know
we
how that
do.
affects their brains. There's no real science behind it. It's trial and error.
Yeah. Dave?
Bill, isn't it
Stand.
true?
I gave Dave a pass because he's got a baby in his hand. You will stand. No.
Isn't it true that the closer we get to the end of Satan's rule, the more active he's going to be?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what I thought of first, is all these things are happening in the last several years. You start with Columbine up, you know, he sort of like is hideous. It makes you sick inside to see what he's doing. And he's going crazy, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of merit to what you're saying, you and George both, in that regard, because it's ramping up. It's more. There's more agitation and more results from the agitation, and with the advent of other ancillary items that promote some of these things in our own nature, being and having the proclivities we have, it makes us even more vulnerable to these overreactions and reactionary type behaviors. I want to turn, first of all, over here as we get started and start out in Matthew. I'd like to go there to chapter 6 for a moment and share this with all of you and bring back that all certainly does us well to be reminded of, but nevertheless also something I want to emphasize here for the sake of this presentation. And pick up the content here in verse 6, where this situation in the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus describing the example prayer, not the prayer that needs to be repeated, but the format. A line of thinking when one goes into his prayer closet. In verse 6, we pick up with Jesus' words as recorded by Matthew. But you, when you pray, enter into your closet, and when you have shut the door, pray to your Father which is in secret, and your Father which sees in secret shall reward you openly. But When you pray, use not vain repetitions. Don't repeat yourself over and over and over where it just becomes a mantra, kind of like a rosary. It doesn't make, it has no value. God wants to see you as a person. He wants a real relationship with you. So be yourself. If you're angry, be angry in your prayer until you're able to work it out. I mean, be yourself. Be honest. Be transparent. Be genuine and sincere as you go before your Father. That's what He's looking for. He's looking for a real relationship with you. And Jesus says here, don't use vain repetitions as the heathen do. Okay. Now, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Well, be not you therefore like unto them. Don't be that way, for your Father knows what things you have need of before you ask Him. After this manner therefore pray. And then He proceeds. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debtors as we forgive our debtors. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And then he proceeds on with his dissertation here and narrative regarding the Sermon on the Mount. Now I want to go back to verse 10, because I think it does us all well in regards to keeping this in mind as a focal point, as a fulcrum, as a point of distinction that is so important to establish a motive and an agenda around, and especially for our families. Because this world, brethren, as was already mentioned by George and Dave especially, is not God's world at this time. I mean, it is in the sense that He's involved, of course, but He has pretty much relegated Himself to working within certain segments of society and allowing man to have pretty much freelance in conjunction with Satan the devil, who is still roaming freely on this planet. And we are told that the whole world is deceived because of Satan the devil. We know that he has deceived the whole world by the scripture there in Revelation chapter 12, verse about 9 or so. But here in verse 10, I want to bring your attention to this because it's very important that all of us uses this understanding, this concept as our hub to build our lives around. And here it is. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And also in verse 13, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom. In other words, the kingdom. It becomes very, very important. As you go down here in chapter 6 and essentially make your way through to verse 33, where he goes in talking preceding to that, some of the things that we worry about and have anxiety over, but finally Jesus tumbles to this bottom line where he says in verse 33, but seek you first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. We have a lot going against us right now, brethren. The society that we're living in is so demanding. Prices are so very high on things, necessitating both parents to be working outside of the home. Children turn into latchkey kids oftentimes. In other cases, the parents come home, they're so tired, they don't feel like dealing with the children or dealing with family issues. They look at television, kind of chilling out, or maybe they've got a few things they want to take care of. They read the paper, trying to catch up on just some things, tend to spend some time with their own needs, leaving the children to these video games, as Carly was pointing out, or leaving the children to just become babysat by the television, and hence they begin to withdraw. They tend to and begin to build their personalities around the things that they're most exposed to. And then you combine that with some parents who are dysfunctional to begin with, Or that the family is broke up and it's a divorced family and the kids are split and there's fighting going on between the two exes. Or maybe the one ex got remarried and doesn't like the kids. Or God forbid the ex, the stepfather or the stepmother is harassing or abusing the biological kid of the other mate. I mean, you get into all of this mishmash of confusion in relationships and identities where people just don't even know which way's up and which way's down, and it confuses the kids to begin with, especially if they're young and they have to choose between one parent or the other in a divorce situation because they're not capable emotionally or mentally to make those kinds of decisions. These two boys, apparently, both of them, his brother Ryan and this one, the shooter, Adam, I guess it is, Lanza, as that has been identified by the news, are products, again, of divorced families. And divorce does have a toll on young people. There's no question about it. It has a toll on older people. It has a toll on the husband and the wife. I mean, it generates heartache. It generates emotional trauma. It generates problems with trust that sometimes can be carried on for the rest of their life. And in their ability to build relationships, they have trouble because betrayal leaves such imprints and such scars in the mentality and in the emotional makeup of a human being. And I know you understand some of this because I know some of you have gone through some of these things in the course of your life because we've all been affected by, in some cases, these things. And then in the church, in our case, in the church, we have mates that don't share the faith. And that makes it tough, doesn't it? Because in that particular case, there is sometimes a struggle that goes on over the kids. Because the one mate doesn't share the same passion or level of commitment to the church or to this way. And so you're limited by what influence you can bring to the table. Even in some cases, whether it be your grandkids, let alone your own kids. It may even be your grandkids because the children no longer share the faith, or maybe they never did share the faith. You thought they did because you were bringing them up that way, but then lo and behold, they drift and go their own way and never do come back to the corral, and consequently now don't want anything to do with grandma putting and forcing her religion or grandpa's religion down the throat of their children, even though they're your grandkids. But of course, with you being grandkids, you're second down the lean, if you know what I'm saying, because mom and dad rule the roost. And so if you're not allowed to talk to them about God, guess what? You got to zip it up or lose the relationship and access. I mean, we've got so much we're dealing with, so many things that are really impacting our society and the condition that we're finding ourselves faced with. And yet we sit here with understanding some of the greatest reasons for life. Some of the greatest purposes of life. And sometimes our influence in communicating that and articulating that and the opportunities that we have or the leverage we have to affect understanding in those that we have chances to expose this information to is limited at best because of all of these other outside pressures or forces that limit us from being able to explain some of the things that we would like to explain. But we need to, in general, brethren, increase our ability to perceive and take time to influence, and I'm talking primarily to those that have access to young people, whether they be grandkids or your own children, nieces and nephews, to take time as you're able to orchestrate, engineer, opportunity to share principles and values in the minds of these kids. We're looking at all the wrong reasons for what happened in Connecticut. It's not guns. Guns don't kill people. You put a gun on a shelf, guess what? That's where it's going to be. It's an inanimate, whatever you call it, object. It It has no legs. It has no mind. It has no power. You could put a loaded 223 bazooka, 12 gauge, 18 gauge, 22 gauge shotgun loaded to the hilt on a shelf. And I don't care where it is. It could be on your bed, under your pillow. But guess what? That's where it's going to stay until somebody comes and picks it up. Because you see, who murders people is not your dog or your cat with a gun. Who murders people with guns are other people. People kill people with guns. Our problem is that we are losing touch with our values. We're losing connection with the value of life. I'm no longer looking at life as something sacred. Why? Because I'm watching a steady diet of the Chainsaw Massacre movies, where it's just a meat market, zzz, chopping heads off, legs and limbs, over and over and over. Or I'm spending hours upon hours with Grand Theft Auto. Yahoo! Killed 14 more cops. Yeah! Or here's another one. Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Battlefield or Gears of War, Halo. I mean, all of these things are violent. It's blowing people up, and you get points for it. If you kill a lieutenant, I guess you get more points. I remember I had an employee who was in Vietnam. What a nice guy. He worked for me. Committed suicide. He shot himself. But he told me stories about what he did in Vietnam. You know what he did in Vietnam? He was a medic. He would go down on the copters. Steve knows what I'm talking about. Steve was in Vietnam. He'd go down on the copters, jump out of those copters, crawl in the weeds, and pull bodies and torsos out. With men screaming because half their body was gone. They're still alive. And he'd drag them into the copter. Guns firing over his head. And what he told me, I'm saying this because of this, he told me that the Viet Cong would get better pay if they could shoot a medic, a radio guy, communications, or an officer, leadership. Leadership, communications, or a medic. So you know what they had to do? He never wore a cross on his helmet because that was a bullseye. Because the Cong would get him. He was top dog. So they would make sure they would get him because they'd get a raise for doing that. You know, Grand Theft Auto. I got a raise. I got a lieutenant. I don't know if that's the game. I have never played it. I've never even seen it. I don't even know what it is other than I know by reputation it's a bad game. It deals with killing women, killing cops. And what do we think? We take God out of our schools. We take God out of the families. Because guess what? There are some parents that are atheists. There are parents that are dysfunctional about their religious upbringing because maybe they were abused, maybe they were misused, maybe they were taught certain things like Santa Claus was real when he wasn't. I mean, I don't want to minimize things, but lying is what I'm saying. Lying to your children or to you as a person only to find out that later on, hey, guess what? These things weren't true. We've got to get back, brethren, to teaching the values of life. And that means take time to our kids. Turn the computer off. Turn the cell phone off. I was going to have my cell phone, have my wife call me just to illustrate a point, you know. Oh, excuse me, I got to take this call, you know. Because it is just so now in our day and age effective in causing many of us to withdraw and to begin to alienate. Here's an important point. Alienate affection. If I can alienate my affection for you as a human being, guess what? Then you become nothing more than an object. It's much easier to kill an object than something that I have an affection for. That I know, wow, you've got grandkids and you've got a son and a daughter and you've got a wife and you've got a daughter. to kill you, that's going to affect them, so, I take you out. People don't think of that. They're just objects. Bam, bam, bam. It's like ducks on a shell, Bam, 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 bam. Wow, look at this. Isn't this neat? Wow. You don't think it's not affecting people? Brethren, it is affecting people. Therein lies a lot of where we need to target from. What we don't even realize is our society's momentum, the trends that are developing, are actually taking us into this really, really black hole where people no longer value life. They're not teaching their children the values of life. They're not teaching them the riches of family. Because the kids are fighting with the family. This kid killed his mother. This kid killed his mother because the children don't respect the parents, because the parents, in some cases, I hate to say it, but they're not respect worthy. They're drunks. They're druggies. They're selfish parents. It's all about them. And the kids see that. The kids understand that. And so guess what? They don't respect that. And so don't go talking to me. Because guess what? You're talking to one. I was brought up that way. My parents didn't take time with me. It was all about them, you see. I know where I speak, brethren. We've got to take time with our children. We've got to show our children that there's value to them. Because guess what? Our children, they're little people. That's what they are. They're little people. They're not rugrats. They're not these disrespectful names that we assign to them that make their esteem seem lower than a cockroach. Or that they take up my time. They're too distracting. Just shut up, And in some cases, some parents, they lose their temper, don't they? The child says something and they don't even think. Whack! That's it. And then the child doesn't even know sometimes why he got whacked. I hope if we do spank our children, we do it in a controlled manner and in a fashion where you take time to explain why they got spanked. That's a tremendous opportunity to teach your child. And I speak to this program too. Of right and wrong. They throw a temper tantrum, don't just whack them. Hold them down. Bring them, tell them, talk to them. You'd be surprised how much a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, 4-year-old understands what you're saying to them when you take time to just directly look in their eyes and force them to look into your eyes and tell them to knock it off. Behave yourself. We need to do these things. We need to show them that there is great richness in family. We need to take time to develop traditions in our family. We have a wonderful tradition in our family. We call it Thanksgiving. I hope you do too. Thanksgiving. It's a wonderful tradition. We don't keep Christmas. We don't keep Easter. But we do keep Thanksgiving. That's a wonderful tradition. There's some other traditions that we keep too that we've developed over the years in our family called the Holy Days. And years ago when my children were real young, it was called Sabbath. Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath was special. Margie made it special. Margie made it special. Every Friday night, it was a family night. And there was a special meal on that table. And it was nice. There's good memories there. Good memories at Feast of Tabernacles that hopefully you're developing and that you are building. But I realize that these are not easy to do, especially if you don't share in the faith with a mate. It becomes very, very difficult. Yet, nevertheless, it is important, brethren, it is important that we do the best we can to help develop relationships with our children and grandchildren with God. That's important. Richness in family, richness in the value of life, and the value of them as a person and a relationship with God are so important items for us as grandparents and parents to do the best we can to help our youngsters to understand there's more to life than just their computer, their iPhones, and iPads. 84% of all teenagers in the United States of America own one electronic device at least. 84%. They either own an iPhone, have access to a computer, or indeed are on an iPad or some kind of an iPod, but something. 84% of our kids are sucked up into cyberspace. That's a fact. That's a fact. A statistic that is very current to what is happening right now. And the fastest growing internet addiction that is happening right now while we're drawing breath is pornography. And don't think your kids aren't subjected to it via that cyberspace window called the internet. They are. And they can click on anytime they're in privacy and be able to go to any kind of porno site, just like many men and women do, because both are actively involved. They have now sites in cyberspace for married couples, like dating services. You can go to a married couple dating service site where you, being married, can hook up with other married, in my case, women, because I'm a heterosexual. You're welcome. And I can hook up with, discreetly, another married woman. And do you know that 36% of all connections on the internet result in a sexual encounter? That's a fact. Don't think, brethren, these electronic devices are innocent little helpers to make us more efficient. They are. Don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-iPhone, I'm not anti-computer. I live and die by them. Email, I can't believe it. I look back on it now like it used to be years ago when when the fax machine came on board and I was in business and we'd do business and now we got a fax machine to do business. I used to think, how did I ever do business before a fax machine? Now I'm of the opinion, how did I ever do business and communicate with other people without email? Because it's so convenient, it's so fast, it's so responsive, and you can keep in communications and actually even manage things via email, just through communicating. That's great. It's wonderful when it's used right, you see. But so often, brethren, now more than anything, as usually it goes in our human nature way, we find ourselves in cases of abusing the privileges that we do have. We need to truly be very cognizant of how we obey God. And over here in 1 John, we understand that here in chapter 5, we're told that whosoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loves him, that begat, loves him also that is begotten of him. And by this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. For the love of God, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. And therein lies an underscore element to pin us to this hub of seeking the kingdom first. This is how we do it. This is how it's done. This is the balancing lever, if you will, that provides us to stay on track to achieve the priority that we ought to have in our lives of staying steady toward keeping on the track toward that kingdom. That's important. And all the things that are around us, especially if we have mates that are, maybe they're not in the church with their whole being, but they're accepting, to take those opportunities together to build your family strong. Maybe you don't have a mate in the church that is at all happy with the church and fights you all the way, all along. Well, then you know what you need to do is do what you can and do the best you can in working with what you're allowed. And for the sake of the marriage and for the sake of the relationship of the children, do the best you can as long as there's no harm. There's way involved. Do the best you can to maintain an access to allow for and afford the development of and construction of a relationship with God. Our children are starving. They are starving for relationships with God. I can talk to my grandkids, and I know for a fact, because I have, of many of girlfriends of my granddaughter Sydney who are already sexually active. I've got a son-in-law who is Darren, back there at the camera, who is also in school, coaches basketball, and has kids on his team that are already fathers. They're already fathers. How do I know that? He's told me. I've even seen some of them play basketball when I've gone to his games. It's the world we're living in. Why is that? Why is it that young people think they can have sex without consequences? Because they see it in Friends. You know the sitcom I'm talking about? The sitcom? Or they see it in some other, the new normal. The new normal, that's another one I understand, with a few homosexuals mixed in to expand the limit here a little bit, And so they think that they can hop in bed like rabbits without any little rabbits coming along. When in fact it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And then all of a sudden, they've got a baby and they're only 15 years old. Or they're only 16 years old. Or they're 14 years old. And it happens. It's happening all the time. Why is that? Because we're not doing a good enough job on sexual management and how to put prophylactics on cucumbers? No. It's not about health class. It's about a relationship with God that thou shalt not commit fornication. Don't have sex until you're married. Because guess what? Sex is reserved for a covenant relationship. That's what we're missing, the spirituality of marriage. People look at marriage today, it's purely secular. It's purely secular. There's nothing associated with marriage that in many minds of people, other than they get married in a church with a pastor who marries them perhaps sometimes, other cases they just get a justice of the peace to marry them. And they're happy with that. But my point is, a major element, missing dimension in marriage today is that marriage has been really extracted from the spiritual side of things. And now it's purely a contract between me and the female, in my case, because I'm heterosexual, to do that. I wonder sometimes, why even get married if that's all it is? Because all you're doing is putting yourself vulnerable to allowing another person access to your assets. But that's another story. I'm being facetious, if you know what I'm saying. So, with everything that we've got going, brethren, where it really comes, where, as it's been said, the rubber meets the road, it's real simple. It gets back to these values and standards of right and wrong. Because if we look at pop culture, if we look at society in general to define for us what's right and wrong, Katie barred the door. It's no wonder people are confused. Because it is confusing. There are so many mixed signals coming out and about and that we're now surrounded by that even the government is confused about how to define marriage. Even the government's confused about marijuana and whether or not it's better to have it legalized than not legal. And so consequently, we see now a trend developing where already 2 states at present have legalized the smoking of, eating of, ingesting of marijuana. And now they're all befuddled by that. I found this rather amusing. They're all befuddled about how they're going to determine whether a person on marijuana, how they're going to determine whether or not he's too stoned to drive. So they're all confused about how they're going to measure the level of THC in your blood. Because marijuana, obviously, as maybe you don't know, but it is a fact, that doesn't really dissipate out of your system for about 72 to 96 hours. So consequently, you could get stoned out of your brains today, not
do anything tomorrow, not do anything on Monday, not do maybe anything for a half a day on Tuesday, and then just take a little toke on a joint on Tuesday, get pulled over, and get arrested for it when you only had a half a toke. But they think you've got way over too much because you really got blasted 3 days before. And you're going to be there with the policeman. No, I only had a half a toke. No, not according to your blood level, buddy. You are out of it, I mean, it's insane. It is, when you start thinking about these things and seeing how some of these things are coming down, and then we try in retrogression or in redress, attempt to try to straighten out the decision that was made, it's silly. It's almost ludicrous. And it does cause you to have anxiety and in some cases a bit of troubled hearts and minds in regards to how to handle some of these things, because we are indeed, brethren, in a situation where it doesn't look like it is going to get any better anytime soon. I want to shift, though, here on you for a moment in talking about this developing of a relationship with God, and add this to, what could I say, a suggested action plan, perhaps. I don't know how much time do I have left here to get into this. Okay, well, let me suggest this. Turn with me for a minute to Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23. I'm kind of being just freelance here today because this whole situation is just, it is just so amazing that so many people are focused on the guns, when in fact, cars kill people. Why aren't we focused on cars? If a car is sitting in your driveway filled with gas, and it's a Bentley, it's a wonderful car, it's a beautiful car, and it's just sitting there doing nothing, it can't kill anybody. But then if you put it in the hands of a football player down in Florida like it was done last year, and he runs over somebody coming back from a strip joint, half drunk and looped, and hits and runs, I won't mention his name, those of you who have been following the news know who he was, that's who kills people, not the Bentley. Not the Bentley. And I say that just for emphasis because really the target, brethren, again, let me reiterate, it's values in life. My life means something. Don't shoot me. I've got kids at home. I've got people that love me. Don't take me out. Respect me, as it says in the one movie, regard me, because I have value. I have value. And so it is important that we also, though, instill that value in our youngsters, that we install that value in our kids so that there's esteem. And the kids know that, well, if I have value, you have value. Because I have value. Traditions, important traditions. Those are important. The richness of family. Our children should want to be at home. They should want to be there because they have the sense of security and protection and provision, and most of all, love. Unconditional love. That's important. But also, as I mentioned, so very, very important to have the home be an environment where the relationship with God can be nurtured and grown, because they're not going to learn it in school. It's long, long gone from the days of when schools would read scripture in class. Those days are gone. It's long, long gone to even have prayer in class, even though those kids were praying in a closet with that teacher. I find that interesting as the stories began to unfold and what they were doing while that gunman was running around the halls shooting everybody. The children and the teacher were in a closet, hidden, praying to God as she was attempting to encourage those little kids. Bless her heart. Prayer at that moment was back in school, where it belongs. Those kids, all kids, if they're not getting it at home, they should get it at school in relationship to God and developing a relationship. But back here on Leviticus 23 is a very important element in regards to developing traditions that we in God's church have opportunity to develop through the utilization of these benchmarks throughout the year. I want to say it now at this time of the year because we've just completed a cycle of God's holy days. The holy days, and I'm including also, brethren, the weekly Sabbath. Because the weekly Sabbath is 52 opportunities for you to make that day special for your family and to utilize that 24-hour period at minimum to take time out. Okay, kids, time out. If need be, turn off the iPhones, turn off the computer, and bring out the old-fashioned book that you have to turn pages to in manual labor, manual labor. And we're going to blow off the dust of our Bibles, and we're going to learn about who the first man and the first woman was. Oh yeah, their name was Adam and Eve. That's what I was teaching all week. This week I've been teaching my grandson the first people, Adam and Eve. I'm reading them the Bible stories. I get a chance to do that, so I'm going to take advantage of that. And he's been learning about Adam and Eve being the first man and the first woman. And in so doing, I can teach him that women were made for men. And I can teach him men were made for women. See? See how that works? He should grow up not confused. There's no guarantees. Why? Because if I don't do that, mom doesn't do that, dad doesn't do that, guess what? His friends will. Guess what? The computer will. Guess what? The TV will. Guess what? The books he reads, the magazines he sneaks will. Because guess what? If mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, uncles and aunts move out of the way, just like a void, it will be filled by something else automatically. Your not doing will afford something else to do, like it or not. It's the society we live in. What I'm saying is, these are wonderful, wonderful opportunities, accesses, tools for the development of the relationship between your children and yourself, of course, and God. And right here, they're all listed, of which in Leviticus 23, many of you here in this room, I'm speaking to the choir, are very familiar with. I want to mention here in verse 34, dropping down in detail about the Feast of Tabernacles especially. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto the Lord. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work. 7 days you shall offer an offering made of fire unto the Lord. On the 8th day, the great last day, shall be a holy convocation also unto you. And you shall offer an offering made of the fire of the Lord in the solemn assembly, and you shall do no servile work. These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, and so forth and so on. Besides the Sabbath, verse 38, besides the Sabbaths of the Lord, and besides your gifts, and besides all the vows, and besides the freewill offerings which you give unto the Lord. And then he goes on and reiterates again a little bit about the Feast of Tabernacles and again the Sabbath. Point being, use these, brethren. Those of you on the disc program, use these days to build traditions in your family. I grew up in a family that had traditions around Christmas. Why can't we develop traditions around these holy days? We should be able to. Traditions and memories that our youngsters can remember for the rest of their lives because that's their culture. That's where they came from. That's their makeup. That's what they know to be true and right and biblically founded, unlike Christmas and Easter and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and all those kinds of things. Those are solid precepts and solid items that you can build strong traditions around, rich family values around, and rich understanding about yourself and God as you develop that relationship through these things. Feast of Tabernacles, or going backwards now, the Day of Atonement, Feast of Trumpets, Pentecost, Days of Unleavened Bread, and of course Passover, and don't let me forget, and don't let me de-emphasize because I'm not marginalizing it, the weekly Sabbath. That's an important day. When that sun sets, everything stops. Everything stops. And if it doesn't, you're only cheating yourself. You're only cheating yourself. You're cheating your family and you're cheating God out of having the opportunity to develop this two-way communication and relationship with you that he wants to have with you and your family. And again, I respect the limitations that are on us for those of us who don't have full cooperation within the family unit. All I can do and all I can say is I encourage you to take opportunity in whatever access you're given to do the best you can with what little you have in hopes that God will afford you doors that will open in the future to greater accesses with them. And they may come even later after they grow up and leave home. They may come back. You never know. You never know. You just got to be patient. Let God have his time working through those set of circumstances that you find yourself constrained and contained in due to your life's conditions and the decisions that have been made along the course of your life. So keep these things in mind, brethren, as you proceed with looking at things out and about and all around us, because these things that we find ourselves surrounded by are impacting us. They're impacting our jobs. They're impacting our health. They're impacting our mental well-being and our emotional state. I don't know about you, but I was affected by this whole situation in thinking about these parents. I mean, I didn't have to be affected by it. I could have blown through it and not listened to it, didn't stop and think about the parents, about my grandkids in relationship to the situation, or my own children, or how it would be to have a child like that there, kissing them goodbye or her goodbye in the morning and not now ever having opportunity to say anything else to them, or maybe not kissing them goodbye, which is even worse, and now not having opportunity anymore to say anything to them because they're past. These are things that we're living in and amongst, brethren. So let me encourage all of us to just take time, really, to consider the necessity to develop good, strong human values with ourselves and our children, to develop good, strong family traditions, and develop a good insight and perception of the richness of family. That's what's happening. I don't want to oversimplify it, but the family's breaking down all around us. And the key to any strong society, history has shown, whether it was the empire of the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Persians, whatever it is, once the family breaks down, so goes society. Society breaks down. Families need to be revitalized. There needs to be a revival within the family to develop strong family values, a richness about family, regardless of what your circumstances may be. Because really, bottom line, the most important thing about all of us is, we don't need mansions and don't need big cars. What we need is each other and the love that we have for one another. That's the bond, brethren. That's the bond. Your word, your honesty, your transparency, your forthrightness with your kids, and kids with your moms and dads. Be honest with them too. You can't expect honesty back if you're being dishonest and disingenuous. It's a two-way street. It's always a two-way street. And if mom and dad perceive that you're gaming them, guess what? You're going to get that kind of reaction. Then you're going to get mad. Well, why don't you trust me? Well, the fact is because you don't trust me. It's a two-way street. What do you mean I don't trust you? You get into this argument about who trusts who, when in fact nobody's trusting anybody. And you're just reacting to one another. Somebody's got to stop, say, time out, hold it, let's start over and try this again. So let's really look at these things, and most importantly, brethren, focus on the development of a relationship with God by keeping God's kingdom as the focus and the hub of your thrust as you utilize the love of God in your lives, which is abiding by his commandments.